This is the Books Podcast presented by Tim Hague.
All the relationships in Silicon Valley are so incestuous and tangled up with each other that I think everyone's kind of a frenemy. Travis is going to do every fight to the very end, including on video with the driver.
I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, is this the kind of book you'd like your wives and servants to read?
We're talking about Super Pumped, the battle for Uber, with Mike Isaac. Mike, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So this is the story of Uber, and yes, it is a story of Silicon Valley tech startups and venture capitalists and boardroom battles. And yes, there's a good deal of technical information and a dizzying cast of characters. It's like War and Peace. But it's an absolute page-turner. Partly because, as a reader, you can barely believe the sheer excess and the shameless impropriety you're reading about, and partly because Mike Isaac has brought it vividly to life. Mike, you're a journalist, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so and you work for the New York Times.
That's right. Tech journalist.
But your beat is
I've been writing about technology probably about 10 years now. So I've been and then Uber came up across my radar in 2014 when I joined the New York Times.
And you've been following Uber more or less since the beginning. I live in San Francisco, and so back in 2010, I remember how hard it was to get a cab or anything there, and Uber's very fast descent in the city kind of took everyone by storm. Well, now, I don't have an Uber account, and cards on the table, Mike. I've always thought Uber was the work of the devil. Am I right?
I think there would be some people who would disagree with you in that they like the product, but they probably don't like the people behind it, is what I would say.
Or the business model. I mean, in a way, Uber is like the poster boy for that kind of tech business, which, okay, delivers the product.
Yep.
Yeah, everybody likes Uber Eats, or everybody likes Amazon because they can get things quickly, and everybody likes to be able to dial up an Uber cab and get half the price to get back to Bushy or wherever.
Yep.
But I wouldn't want to be an Uber driver. I wouldn't want to work for Amazon in the picking warehouse. And that seems to me, I mean, that business model is brutal.
You're entirely right. It's very much focused on the customer and the user, and like Travis Kalanick's former CEO of Uber, his whole thing was we need to be customer obsessed and make it absolutely perfect. But the big but about that is that for years they kind of just exploited drivers and played with their wages, and you can't really treat your labor force very well over an extended period of time if you want this business to work. And
even to the point, one of the lovely points, which I didn't realize, but obviously you make clear to us, is that Travis didn't want you to be able to tip your driver because he wanted everything to be incredibly frictionless when you used Uber. If you have to decide about tipping, that's less. But I mean, from the driver's point of view, what a terrible prospect.
I mean, that's tipping is like baked into, at least in the States, just baked into how things go or how a cab works or whatever. The other thing that they wouldn't refer to them really as drivers, but as supply in a sort of reference to supply and demand.
Of course, because they didn't want to regard them as a human component of the process.
That's exactly
They're
right.
Just a cog in the wheel, as it were.
Right, exactly. And I think probably only after their nightmare 2017, which was the year that all the scandals that we talk about in the book, did they really start to try and improve driver relations. But I would probably talk to a bunch of drivers who would say it's still in the toilet.
Well, we will come to that because even though I disliked Uber intensely before I read your book, I think I underestimated how awful it is. Now, we talked. I said it's the work of the devil. If that devil is Travis Kalanick, tell me about him.
So Travis, he's a serial entrepreneur. He had done a few different startups. Born in California in the LA area, did a proto version of Napster, the file sharing service back in the day called Scour.
And he did that before Napster, didn't he?
It was actually earlier than Napster. He was really early to this idea that file sharing in the digital age is going to be a thing.
So he did see what was coming.
Yes, he definitely is one of those founders with vision, and I think that those are not always the case in all of startup land. Some may be good business operators, but Travis was kind of Steve Jobsian in that way. He really had vision there. And so he got sued into oblivion out of that startup when the MPAA and RIAA, these entities in America, decided that they wanted you to pay for their content instead of steal it. And I think one of the real formative things for him was one of his venture capitalist backers ended up backstabbing him and kind of turning on him when they got these big lawsuits and saving his own skin. And so Travis at that point was like, I'm never going to trust VCs again.
VC being venture capitalists.
Venture capitalists again.
Which is a big deal. It's one of the major themes of the book.
Yeah.
Because apart from anything else, Kalanick was determined always to have control.
That's right.
Absolute control. He still had venture capitalists putting money in, and sometimes enormous amounts of money.
Yep.
And venture capitalists, on the whole, want to get their money back out at some point. Now, you do that by going public.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Kalanick didn't. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to go on, as it were, controlling the company and drawing in all this money.
Yep.
But he was never going. It's kind of it's almost a Ponzi scheme that he was running.
That was perfect. That's kind of like how the company WeWork is operating
Yes,
right now.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm riveted to the WeWork story just because it's literally the same thing that happened with Uber. But Travis was interested in raising as much private capital as possible and taking all your money without giving you the benefit of cashing out or letting his employees.
Let's talk about numbers, though. There was one point at which he raised $250 million from one investor at one time for one of the rounds of investment. I mean, these are eye-watering figures. It's not like if you and I were to start a business and get 100,000 quid from the bank. $250 million, $250 million.
Yep.
Yes, you'd want something out of that if you were putting it in.
I mean, it's funny, Travis and his sidekick, this guy named Emil Michael, their whole thing was we need enormous amounts of money up front to plow, to your earlier point about half the ride cost, like to plow subsidies into the rides so that people will start demanding the service, right?
And give every driver an iPhone.
Yes.
And give people free rides to get them in, get the drivers to give them money to join and
do it, and just throw it everywhere. And they were losing. I mean, talk about vaporizing cash. They were just burning cash as quickly as possible to get this going. And their thesis was, the more we spend, the easier it will be to kickstart this demand around the world. And it worked in the sense that people did really gravitate towards the product almost immediately. The problem for venture capitalists, at least, is that Travis had no intention of really ever wanting to take his company public at any point, and had no intention of letting them have a say really in how he ran the company. It was truly his company.
And here's an interesting detail. He was already rich. He'd sold out a previous company.
Sure.
So and you say he didn't take a salary from Uber.
Right.
He did dispose of quite a lot of their money one way or another, but he didn't need to get paid. He didn't need the payout. Yep. What he needed was the power.
Yep.
And of course, he also wanted, well, you've got a lovely phrase, the cult of the founder, which, and again, he's the poster boy for that, isn't he? He's the poster boy for the cult of the founder.
That's right.
How does that work?
So I would say in Silicon Valley, there's this idea of, the founder of a company is, it's kind of the thing that Mark Zuckerberg really epitomized. Maybe this teenager in his hoodie in his dorm room, sitting over a bowl of ramen, coding the next $1 billion app, right? This mythology that these boy geniuses can change the world if you let them, and anyone could be a millionaire or a billionaire once you get there. And I think that lends itself to giving founders much more leeway than they might otherwise deserve or have it sometimes. And so maybe in the best case scenario of this founder worship, you have a Zuckerberg who builds a sprawling empire. And in the worst case scenario, I would argue you would have someone like Kalanick, who has basically created a very gnarly, as I get into in the book, gnarly culture of misogyny and law boundary pushing, law breaking, if you want to do that. And so I just think that putting a question mark on how much we worship founders just because they started a company or started a business is something that we should start doing. But it's very much like a predominant train of thought, especially in Silicon Valley, especially around venture capitalists who just sort of praise these young men who are starting companies all the time.
You make the point though that Kalanick, he was happier doing things in an underhand way than doing them by the book. I think the first occasion that he ignores the rules, it's Portland, Oregon, not Maine, Portland, Oregon.
Yep.
Where he doesn't get permission to start running Uber. He runs it anyway, and he just ignores the fact that he's been given direct instructions not to.
That's right.
And of course, he's not a capitalist. He doesn't want to go into competition with them. He's Genghis Khan. He wants to destroy everybody else.
That's right.
Because it's not about competing and being the best. It's about being the only.
He always viewed it as a winner-take-all situation. There wasn't enough room for two people in the market. It was only him. And I think also, he had this real, his worldview was sort of Hobbesian in that you just had to kill other people before they killed you, and one of my favorite phrases that a employee said was, the law isn't what is written, it's what is enforced.
Oh, that's good.
Right? And that was, they took that to heart because they'd storm into Portland and the transportation officials can't find all of the Ubers that are on the road. In some cases, there are these software tools that actually hid the Ubers from the officials. So there were all sorts of, nefarious means in which they stormed into cities and they just caught them off guard.
I want to talk a little bit about that. And we're going to get a little bit technical.
Yeah.
Which
try not to get too geeky.
It's all right. I'll stop you if you do, because it's outside of my comfort zone. I want to know why Apple didn't just shut them down.
Yeah.
I learned from your book, the timing was perfect. The iPhone was a necessary event for Uber to work. Yeah. But Uber played, I was going to say fast and loose with Apple. No, that's not true. They behaved extremely badly towards Apple in terms of they cheated Apple's restrictions. Yeah. They deliberately, because there was a time when somebody had back-engineered the Android app and discovered that Uber was hoovering up vast amounts of information, your phone book and your messages and everything, stuff that they don't need.
Yes.
So they were hoovering all this up in order to be able to do quite interesting things in terms of focusing and shutting people out and all of this. And then they did that to Apple as well. Yeah. And it wasn't a grey area. Yeah, don't do that. Apple care more about their users' privacy than pretty much anything else. And Uber completely ignored that. Why didn't Apple just ban the Uber app from their phones?
Yeah, this is a real sort of interesting point about the iPhone and the App Store. Apple can be a kingmaker, right? Like if they decide your app is important or whatever, they can just sort of promote it to everyone, and it can be a way that actually works to help them sell more iPhones, right? But at the same time, it puts them in a position of slight weakness, and perhaps the companies might have some leverage over them because once an app becomes popular enough, people will get mad if Apple decided to take it away from the App Store. Like imagine if Instagram was suddenly taken away from the App Store. People might stop buying.
I don't think that would bother me, but I take your point.
Younger people.
Yeah, younger people.
Yeah,
my
people
children.
That are not. Yeah, exactly. People that are glued to Instagram all day. So I think that was the calculus when Uber broke Apple's rules intentionally by deception. And sort of they had this, in the book I talk about this come to Jesus moment where, Kalanick goes and talks to Tim Cook. Tim Cook values user privacy more than anything.
Tim Cook of Apple.
Of Apple, CEO of Apple, successor to Jobs. And he just sort of has to come hat in hand saying, look, we're sorry, please don't kick us off the App Store. And I think they got a real drubbing there. But Uber, at the same time, this was like, I want to say 2014-ish, Uber was growing like a weed and everyone really did enjoy it. So Apple's in this weird position where they have to kind of come to terms with people breaking the rules and then smack them down so that they don't do it again.
Well, yeah, I mean, Apple would, because every time you do a new version of the app, Apple go through it.
Yes.
So they might, as you say, Apple sometimes said, we can't allow this.
Yep.
And it might conceivably have been something that they were not sure about. But we know that Uber very deliberately, I mean, they were repurposing Apple's technology to steal other people's drivers, which is not what Apple had in mind.
No, I mean, one of the things that I think Apple really does value compared to, say, a Facebook or a Google or literally any other company that tracks you using advertising technology is user privacy, right?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
So
the FBI.
their whole right,
Don't get
exactly.
into it.
No, that was a whole other thing. Yeah, and so Apple, Uber was just sort of bypassing these rules. Apple had to sort of lay down the law there and say, no, this is what we're about, and you can't go there. So, I mean, I have other criticisms of Apple, but I will give them props at least on the idea that they care about user privacy.
I have to say that if it's a battle between Apple and Uber, because I don't like Apple either,
Yeah.
it's like a cup final between Chelsea and Arsenal. I hate them both, and I don't know which one I want to lose more. So, what went wrong? In the end, Travis Kalanick is ejected from Uber, having had the most absolute control. I mean, he basically had no financial officer. There was no corporate governance. He there's a lovely quote you say. He never worried about money. He could always raise more. Raise, not make. That's which I'm too old for all of this. I always thought you're supposed to try and make money. No.
Not in Silicon Valley.
But then what went wrong? How did the chickens finally come home to roost?
Yeah, I think so. We talk about 2017 was Uber's reckoning for years of bad behavior. I would say there was one thing after another. Internally, employees were melting down over. Travis was on this business council with President Trump, and if you remember back in 2017, this was very much a moment where Trump had just taken office in the States, and people were wondering what he was going to do. And he did this travel ban, and there was basically an incident on Twitter where it looked like Uber was trying to profit off of the backs of taxi drivers that were striking, and an online protest happened. Essentially, 500,000 people deleted their accounts immediately, which just sent the business into a kind of spiral. The other thing that was really a shot across the bow was a woman, ex-employee at Uber named Susan Fowler, wrote just like a blog post, a couple thousand words, and it detailed her time at the company and harassment on her first day on her engineering team by her manager, who asked her to join his open relationship or
It's
something.
so 21st century, though, isn't it? A blog post a week before by somebody else would have had zero effect.
Totally.
Susan Fowler, that's the one that goes viral.
Yes.
And when it goes viral, then it all starts to collapse.
I mean, and this was February of 2017. It was before the Harvey Weinstein stuff in the States, before Me Too really took off. And so it was really a precursor to, I think, a larger movement, but it really did. I think socially things were in such a precarious spot that was like the spark that lit the flame. And internally, and then after that, there was Waymo, Google's self-driving car arm sued Uber.
Let's talk a little about self-driving cars, because I mean, a self-driving car is the acme of ambition for Uber. They don't even then have to have those pesky drivers.
That's right.
So what did they do about what happened with Waymo, which was I think Google's
Yeah, that's their self-driving car, arm.
Yeah.
So basically, there was an engineer at Google, or
his name I remember,
Anthony Lewandowski.
Yes.
And he basically left the company, took a bunch of intellectual property with him out the door
illegally.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like now he's being sued by the Department of Justice in the United States and could face actual prison time. But created a new startup. Uber bought that. And a few months later, after that all happened, Google, in very rare form, Google doesn't go after other people or other companies that often, did this huge public campaign where they're basically like, we are suing Uber, we're suing Anthony Lewandowski, and Larry Page himself was like, nobody steals from me and gets away with it.
But Google has money in Uber. So
That's the other weird conflicted thing where they're also an investor. They were the ones that did that $250 million round. That's
a lot of money.
It's all the relationships in Silicon Valley are so incestuous and tangled up with each other that I think everyone's kind of a frenemy, right? And one day you might be working with someone and the next day you might be stabbing them in the chest. So this was like one of the precipitating factors to investors getting fed up with Travis's hijinks, I think.
So eventually, this is what I find hard to understand. I don't understand exactly what it was that changed. You had, drivers committing suicide in previous years. You had other scandals. There was you tell some marvelous stories about, outrageous parties and events that show up Uber's culture to be atrocious, misogynist and contemptuous but it's kind of like a Simenon novel. When things have to happen at the right moment, then it all unravels.
Yes.
And it's almost as though that moment has to come before things that a year ago would have been fine, or not have been fine, but would have been ridden over.
Yeah. And you
collapse.
can weather that storm maybe back then. I totally take your point. I do think that the fact that they had scandal after scandal in literally a span of maybe 2 or 3 months or whatever, started to weigh on the company's board members and backers, right? And so, and there's a big criticism there where you could say like, well, they've been board members all along. Where was your like pearl clutching when they were doing this before, when all the culture was gnarly and you were busting into cities? But I really do think this is where, and I kind of talk about how the press plays a role in this whole narrative, and the press just went after Uber and started digging up all of these skeletons they had from 7 or 8 years of bad behavior. And after you dump enough bodies out and show like this is how bad it is, Travis started to become, you know what? The last straw, I would say, is the video of him berating a driver, if you remember that. He basically got caught on video screaming at a driver in an argument.
Who was complaining at him, and he was going,
exactly.
What have you got to complain about?
Yeah, it was behavior very unbecoming of a CEO. And I think any other CEO can handle or diffuse the situation, even if you disagree with the driver or whatever. But Travis, that's just not him. That's not in his character. He's going to do every fight to the very end, including on video with the driver.
How far was this book a lawyer's nightmare?
We had a lot of conversations.
I'll bet you did.
I spent a lot of time on the phone.
What about a movie? They've done Jobs and Zuckerberg. Has it been optioned?
It's not yet. I'm hoping that happens. It would be wonderful. I could see it as a movie. I don't know what you think, but I tried to write it. I'm very visual and like I just see things more cinematically. So
in a way, more it would make a movie better than the Jobs film did, because Travis is such an explosive character.
All of the people in this coterie are just larger than life in
some of them
literally
ways.
Like Bill Gurley's
6'10"
enormous.
Yeah,
exactly. I think it would play pretty well. I hope so.
One last question.
Yeah.
Uber is now in a post Travis Kalanick time. Should I get an Uber account? Should I open one?
I think it depends on how you feel about how they treat drivers. To your earlier point about them being the devil and like how they treat drivers, they have tried to change, but they still pay them very low wages. They're lobbying against them in California on certain aspects of becoming employees or whatever. So, if you're okay with those things, sure. But if you feel like drivers deserve more, then probably not.
So no. Mike, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
Super Pumped, The Battle for Uber by Mike Isaac is published by Norton at £19.99. Books Podcast is a Green Shoot production. You can find out more at www.green-shoot.com, and Tim can be reached on tim@green-shoot.com.